Very cool. I love this thing. I love what we do on Fridays, man, because it's so casual. To me, I really want those things to be, super casual, so people can see what it's like to just work with this platform, which is just so amazing. But the best way to learn is it's not to. I think the best way for us to demonstrate how powerful the platform is not to over rehearse stuff.
Right.
It's really kind of show the same kinds of obstacle that people may run into that we run into, because then they know how to overcome them. So, but today I thought would be really, really, really cool is to choose two completely different apps. And one of the things we built this week that I really, really like, and I think has an incredible potential, is Zoom to DonorPerfect.
Oh, okay.
And so Zoom, everybody knows what Zoom is. So I'm going to share my screen here. All right, so let me just share my screen. So Zoom, obviously incredible platform to do live videos and webinars and so forth. But also, interestingly enough, potentially a great lead capture for other purposes. So if you go to the Zoom app marketplace, you'll see APIANT here. We just have a lot of Zoom, a lot of companies using Zoom on our platform.
Right.
We've really, really gone to town, and this is why we're on their homepage here on the front page. And then DonorPerfect, again, a partner that we've had for a while. And DonorPerfect, for those of you who don't know what it is, again, if you don't use DonorPerfect, for the matter of fact, even if you don't use Zoom, doesn't mean you shouldn't watch this. You can still get a lot out of it. But and we have to pick apps to kind of show how the reality of using these integrations. But DonorPerfect is one of the leaders in managing your nonprofit donations and donors and communication and so forth. And they do a really, really good job at it. They have a lot of nonprofits using it. So the question is, we had a challenge these past 2 weeks, which was to connect the two. So in which way, right? So the idea was, you may do a lot of webinars or Zoom meetings, and today we're just going to do Zoom meetings. And you may want to capture who shows up as potential donors, and even ask them some questions, right? You may want to ask either through a poll or through a registration question. You may want to ask specific questions so you know the kinds of interest these potential donors or volunteers may have. So how do you do it? So this is what we're going to build today. It was a lot of fun to build because it really opens up incredible amount of potential in what's possible. Again, you can replace DonorPerfect with something else in this demo. You could just say, I want to send this to HubSpot or Salesforce or whatever, MailChimp, whatever else you want. But in this particular case, we really wanted to show DonorPerfect because we work with it so much. So that's what we're going to do. Now, I'm going to need a little bit of your help because I do want to show some participants. So we'll have to fake that at some point, just to have some participants that answer questions. All right, so let's get started here. Let me log in our APIANT account. So let me just do this here and then I'll bring it over. And we're going to take it really step by step, and you'll see, very straightforward. I mean, all right. And okay. APIANT, here I am. Okay. Again, this is the automation editor. Most people know what it is. This is what it looks like. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to connect Zoom and DonorPerfect here. So let's do that. So I'm going to go to connections. I have a few apps connected here. So first I'm going to connect Zoom. And in this case here, we're going to choose admin. So the difference between admin and individual, this is the Zoom app for admins. This is where you can manage multiple users that are in your Zoom account. Okay, so I'm going to use admin here. It gives you a lot more power. You could do individual with a different endpoint, but right now we're just going to use admin. And this is just if you have your Zoom account has multiple users connected, different Zoom accounts within the Zoom account. Okay, so here I'm just going to say yes, authorize that. And then we're going to connect DonorPerfect. So here's DonorPerfect here. So I'm going to connect same way here, DonorPerfect, and put a username and password. We have a sandbox, so there you go. So now we have DonorPerfect and Zoom connected. I'm going to log in our DonorPerfect account so we can see it. Oops. Here you go. And I'm going to do the same. So here I am with my DonorPerfect and all my donors and so forth. And I'm going to sign in my Zoom account. I'm going to do this off screen here. And here we go. Actually, that's what I had to remember. I want to log in as someone different for Zoom here because we are in a Zoom meeting. So I don't want to mess that up. So I need to log in with a different browser here. So hold on one sec. Now, that's actually kind of interesting that I just brought that up. I'm actually creating meetings in a different account that's managed by the same account that I've connected. So the account that I've connected here is the admin account. And so it doesn't really matter which account I create meetings in as long as they are part of that admin account. Okay. So I know it might seem complex. It really is not. But if you have any questions, just let us know and we'll definitely help you out with that. All right, so I'm logging in a different Zoom account. So when I start the meeting, it does not shut down this webinar. All right, so, okay. So the first question you always kind of ask yourself when you build something like that is, what is the trigger, right? What is going to trigger this automation? And in this, the trigger could be a lot of things. You could have no trigger. You could have a timed automation that runs and fetches information, whatever. But in this particular case, we're going to create a trigger here for Zoom. And we're going to say the trigger is going to be that the meeting ended. Okay. So meeting ended. Whenever you see instant, means it's a webhook Okay. And the reason I'm saying meeting ended is because at the end of the meeting, we want to keep track of all the participants, the kinds of questions or the answers they've given to some questions, and we want to be able to process those into DonorPerfect. So that really just happens at the end of the meeting. Okay. All right. Okay. So here I'm just going to give it a name here. Zoom meeting ends. And then I'm going to use my favorite emoji of all time. My little arrow here. And then here we're going to say add DonorPerfect other info record. Now, what is the other info record? Okay, well, let me just kind of give you a quick little aperçu of DonorPerfect here. So in DonorPerfect, if I go to a donor, this is kind of like the donor card for DonorPerfect, all the information for that donor. You have different areas for different objects, right? Here you have one called other, and other really could be anything you want. Okay, in our case, we're going to say other is going to be an attendance to a meeting. Okay, so that's what we're going to build here. So that's why I said here I called it add DonorPerfect other info record, is because I'm going to add a record in the other table of the DonorPerfect donor. Okay. The other things we're going to do is we're going to make sure the donor exists, and if donor doesn't exist, we'll create them and all of that. But this is what we're aiming to do, is to keep attendance for all these meetings in the other section of DonorPerfect. Okay. All right. So the first thing I'm going to do as an action, believe it or not, is not to go get any information from Zoom. The first thing I need to do, and I always do this with webhooks, okay, is I'm going to make sure that I'm supposed to process this particular payload that came to us from the webhook. Okay. Now, why do I want to do this? Well, because the trigger here is meeting ended. Okay. Is it possible that a meeting ends more than once? The answer is yes. So, for example, somebody starts a meeting and then they ended by mistake, this would trigger. They restarted and then they ended at the proper time, this would trigger again. Okay, so what you want to do is you want to make sure you don't end up with a lot of duplicates in DonorPerfect. Therefore, you want to give yourself a kind of stopgap, a kind of a gate to check, am I supposed to process this particular instance of a meeting ending, right? And the best way to do this is to keep track of it. So how do you do this? Well, I'm going to create a value here. So here I'm going to say lookup, and I'm going to get a value. So here I'm getting get a value that doesn't exist yet, but I'll create it later. Okay. So I'm going to say get value. Okay. In the scope my account, and I'm going to give it a key group. We covered that in the last webinar. What is a key group? What's a key and what's a value? Okay. I'm going to call this Zoom to DonorPerfect. And what is the key? What is the thing that makes this particular meeting unique, right? So we can keep track. Here I'm going to say meeting ID. All right, so meeting ID, and I'm going to grab the meeting ID that is coming from the trigger here. Okay, so, and in this case, it's object ID. We also talked about this last time, is that how do you know this is a meeting ID? Well, you can guess. You may be wrong, but you can guess that this is a meeting ID because the trigger is meeting ended. So if they're sending us an ID for meeting ended, most likely it's a meeting ID. If you don't know, you can always go to the API documentation on Zoom to make sure that the ID is indeed the meeting ID. But in our case, we know that that's the meeting ID. Okay. And then here we're going to create we're going to retrieve a value, which we haven't created yet, but we're doing it here. DonorPerfect update status. Okay. So this is going to retrieve from the APIANT account database for that meeting ID, what is the status of DonorPerfect update status, right? What is the value here? Okay, and then here I'm going to rename this and call this get DonorPerfect update status. All right, so what do I do with this? Well, now I'm going to check based on this value here, do I have an update status, right? By the way, you may not have an update status. So there's one thing I forgot to do, because this may be the first time we see this meeting ID. So there may be no status at all, not even a value, not even a status that says not processed, right? So it's important here, in order for this not to fail, to say continue if non-critical error, because otherwise, if there's no status, it'll just stop there and it'll say, nope, I can't retrieve a value, there's an error. Not having a value is not a critical error, so you just say continue if non-critical error, because you may have no value. All right, so now we're going to create a conditional. We're going to say, do we need to process this meeting, right? Or this update for this meeting? And here I'm going to actually come here and say, oh yeah, this happens sometimes. I'd have to save it the first time, and then I'll be able to add the, so we're going to save that. All right, so now I'm going to create conditional, and here I'm going to say is the value here, right? Let's make sure that it does not contain updated, or, and then I can select this, copy and paste that here, that it also does not contain updating. Now I'll explain to you why I'm doing both in a second here. And then here we're going to rename this to need to process meeting. So need to process meeting goes to the right. And if it doesn't need to process the meeting, it goes to the left. And the way we decide that is here we look and says, hey, does it contain updated or updating? Okay, either one of the two. Now, why updated and updating? I'm gonna take you through that in a second. But before I do that, I need to create another saving of a value here. And here I'm gonna say lookup. And here it's gonna be save value. I'm just gonna save that here, and I'm gonna copy the field mappings from here and then paste them here. And I'm gonna rename this to save DonorPerfect update status updating. Open that up, everything matches, and here I just put updating for the value. Okay. All right, so what did I just do? What I did is I made sure that if somebody starts and stops the meeting back to back, which could happen, right? They start the meeting, they stop it. Oh no, I want to start. Oh no, I wanted to stop it. So we get two payloads at the almost simultaneously, right? Of the meeting ending, it'll only process, if it needs to, it'll only process one of those two payloads, because the first payload ideally would come here and say, hey, I'm updating, let me finish my job, okay? And there's always the finite possibility that they both got passed there at the same time, like right in here, but it's pretty unlikely. So this means that if we get two payloads at the same time, because the meeting was just ended, the first time it's gonna come here and it's gonna say updating, and the second time it's gonna come here and say, no, it's updating, I'm not gonna process that one, okay? That's why we do this. So we do this pretty frequently with webhooks, because, you know, sometimes you may get, you know, more than one webhook, and you don't necessarily, sometimes you don't want to process both of them. You just want to process one of them. or one of the 3 or 4 and so forth. Does that make sense?
Sure does.
Okay, cool. All right, let's continue. So the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to go here and choose get meeting, because we don't get enough information from the webhook. So we're going to go and get the meeting from Zoom, and it needs a meeting ID. Okay. And again, the meeting ID. So I could just type ID here, and you can see, by the way, the trigger is always on the bottom of that list. If you don't want to use the diagram to go selected, right? The trigger is always on the bottom of the list, and the actions are the most recent on top. So here I'm just going to do ID, object ID. Okay, so now I'm getting the meeting. All right, and then I'm going to build a bunch of time transform, just because I know because I've built it before. And here we're going to start reformatting some time and dates and so forth. So here I'm going to come here. I'm going to say transform data, transform date and time, and I'm going to modify and reformat date and time. So the first date and time that I want to modify is going to be I'm going to do it just as I've had it here. I guess I'm starting with the end here. It's going to be the end time. So here, the end time from the trigger. And the output format here is going to be the DonorPerfect output format. So here you can see MMDDYY is what we're going to want. So MMDDYYYY. So month as digits with leading 0. Days of the month as digits with leading 0. And then years 4 digit. Okay.
Hey Fred, did you state this? Why do we have to change or why do we have to transform that data?
Good question. So the reason we want to transform this data is because the date format that we get from Zoom is not the date format that DonorPerfect is going to be able to consume. Okay, so you want to transform the data to make sure that when you write that record in DonorPerfect, and there's going to be a date field for when the meeting, like this date field, that date field needs to be transformed from what you get from Zoom to what you're going to want to send to DonorPerfect.
Is that a safe assumption? Anytime I'm working between apps, is that I should be aware that the formats are going to be different?
Or you can ignore it, and then whenever you get the error, you fix it.
Gotcha.
Yeah, but sometimes they'll match, sometimes they don't, right? Yeah, good question. Reformat meeting and time to DonorPerfect, and I like to be very descriptive here. Some people don't. I think it's a mistake not to be. I like to be very descriptive as to what each thing does. And the reason is, when you start mapping things, when this gets really big and you start mapping things from here to here, it's good to be able to read what these things are supposed to be doing in the context of what you're building, right? Because if this just says saves value, you'd be like, oh, which one was that? And invariably, you're going to make some mistakes. You're going to map it to the wrong thing. So if you really take your time to document each step and name these steps exactly what they do, when you get below in a huge diagram and you're going to grab data from here, 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 and there, and concatenate this and that, you'll have a really good map, descriptive map of where you grab your data from. That's why I really take the time to rename these things. Okay.
I think that's why our platform, APIANT's platform, is different than others, is that you can create and map and note all at the same time without necessarily having to have other documentation that tells you what you did. It's all right here in front of you.
Right. So it's almost self-documenting. I mean, look, when I was in high school and I was learning computer programming, the very first year we weren't even allowed to write any code. All they wanted us to do was draw these diagrams on paper. And they look just like that, because the diagram is really most of the battle. Writing the code, once you have your diagram, is just executing your vision. So here you get to draw the diagram and write the code at the same time, basically.
Yep.
But it's very visually very consistent with at least 1985 code writing, right? When you had to conceptualize what your program is going to do. That's it. So okay, I'm going to copy that. I'm going to move a little faster here because I do want to copy this. I'm going to paste that here. Here we're going to reformat meeting end time to DonorPerfect. And here I'm going to make it a little more pretty, and I'll explain why I do this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, day, comma, 1, 2, 3, 4, space. So what I'm doing here is basically taking that same date, but now I'm giving it a different format, because this is not a format for a date field. This is format for a text field or for a summary of that's readable by human beings. So this is what I would call like pretty date. Okay. All right. There's a bunch of other ones. Okay, I think we can skip the rest here. All right. So I have two date formats, right? And now I'm going to get the participant. So, okay, so in Zoom, you have two ways of at least two ways that I know of doing a poll, so to speak, right? Of asking people questions that they can answer. You can do it at the registration time. So that's when they register before the meeting starts. Okay, you can ask them questions for them to answer. And as a matter of fact, people who are part of this webinar have answered questions. Or you can do a poll during the meeting. Okay, both of them are retrievable in different ways, both of these answers. What we're going to retrieve here is the poll. Okay, so here I'm going to come here. So the poll is only once the meeting has started. Okay, I'm going to come here and choose Zoom. And we're going to get meeting. Make sure I get the one. Meeting participant. Get meeting participant report. Meeting participant report with poll result. Hold on. Meeting participant report with poll results. Oh, you know what? I didn't publish that to prod. Oops. Let me do that. All right, let me just save that. I'm just going to call it building. It means I'm still way in the middle of it. Reopen it. And here, Zoom, get meeting. Get meeting participant report. I can see it. All right. For some reason I don't see it. I think maybe I didn't. All right, let's not do the poll then. Let's do the registration because I do know we have the registration one. So let's just do get approve meeting registrants. All right. So the approve meeting registrants is the first part, right? It's when people answer the question before the meeting starts. Okay. The poll results, I can look. I have it on dev here. I'll show you. I have it right here. Get meeting participant with poll result. For some reason, I can't see it. I can't find it on production. So we can look at that later. But right now, let's just do the one where they answer the questions before that meeting. Okay, so here it's going to be meeting ID. Okay. All right, so now we're going to get multiple registrants who have registered for the meeting and answered questions. So now what do we need to do? Now we need to loop against those here. So we need to loop against every one of these participants. So here I'm going to create a loop. And I'm going to point to get meeting registrants. Let's see what happens here. And then I want to exclude the host. So that means that in each meeting you have a host, okay? And I don't want to, every time there's a meeting, I don't want to keep on logging the host into DonorPerfect. So what I'm going to do is, because I know who my hosts are, there's different ways of doing this. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do a lookup table. And I'm going to, right here, I'm going to list all my hosts and make sure it's none of those guys. So here I'm in this particular account, I have some hosts. Okay. And this is the email of the participant, right? So here, because the participant is listed, the host is listed just the same as any other person, okay? All right. And so this is where I'm going to rename this to host lookup table. All right, so now that I'm looking up, is that participant a host or not? Then I can do a conditional here. And here I'm going to say, you just click on the output of that lookup. And in order for me to know if it's a host or not, we want to make sure that it does not contain the word host. Now, where does it get host? Well, it gets it from the lookup, because if the email is any of these people, it's a host. If not, I guess you could always say anything else is attendee. Okay, so it has a value. Okay, so that's how you would make sure that the host is not included in here. So is not host. Okay. All right, so what have we done? Well, we have the meeting ending. We make sure that we don't reprocess the meeting. We get information from the meeting here. And now we get all the approved meeting participants. We make sure that none of them are hosts that we're going to be updating in DonorPerfect. And now we can search for that email in DonorPerfect, right? So in this case here, if the right here, so is not host. Okay, is not host. Okay, sorry, I had to look at what I'm doing here. Okay, so if he's not host, then now we're gonna go to DonorPerfect. and there's this, we could spend hours and hours on how to build this much more sophisticated, to look up by first and last name and so forth. But I'm going to keep this part pretty simple just to get to the point of what we're trying to do here. I'm going to get the donor by email just to see if this person exists in DonorPerfect, that email exists in DonorPerfect. And I'm going to grab the email from that action here, which is the get approved meeting registrant. Okay. So here, and then remember here, continue if non-critical, because really I'm checking to see if that donor exists in DonorPerfect. Okay. So get donor by email. Now, if I find the person's email, so if I find a donor in DonorPerfect with that email, I'm going to do one thing. And if I don't, I'm going to want to create them. Okay. So that's how I can grow the list in DonorPerfect. So here we're going to say conditional. We're going to see, did we find, we're going to check here, did we find an email? So I can check, did we find any, is there anything being returned? So I like to use the donor ID because the donor ID is kind of the unique ID for that donor in DonorPerfect. So if the donor ID is not empty, it means we found a donor. And if it's empty, we did not find a donor. So if the donor is empty, is not empty, it means we found a donor. What do? Well, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to store the donor ID in the database. So save value. And I'm just going to save the donor ID. I'm going to use Zoom DonorPerfect. And here I'm going to put temp. And I'm going to explain why I'm going to put temp in here. And here the unique key is going to be the participant, right? I could put email, but I'm just going to put the or registrant or email. It's really, whatever we want to do here. I mean, I guess I'm checking against the registrant. So, and I get a registrant ID and I have registrant email here. So here I could just put registrant email or registrant ID. I'm going to put make sure you spell this right. I'm going to put registrant ID right here. And here I'm going to put donor ID. And here I'm going to put the value of the donor that I found. So it's going to be the donor ID right above here. Okay. All right. Why temp and why this automation? So this is more of something that I would tell someone, an enterprise or SaaS company who's using APIANT and they have their dedicated platform, right? Even though you could be a good steward of database if you want to be as an APIANT customer, of course, and we'll help you do that. But if you have your own dedicated platform, or you're a developer on a dedicated APIANT in a box, so to speak, what I'm going to say is kind of important. The reason I'm tagging this key group here as temp, and also I'm making the scope just this automation, is because the data I'm storing here is very temporary, right? It's just for this automation. I'm just trying to determine, do I want to create a donor or not for this particular time for this registrant? The next time I run the same automation, I may have a different answer because the donor has already been created. So why keep that in database forever, right? The answer is it's good to identify the type of data that you store that you want to be able to purge within 30 days or 60 days, just so you don't grow your database unnecessarily. So we like to put temp, and then we're able to say, hey, anything in the key group temp, we can purge within 30 days or whatever it is, okay? So that's why I do that here. Because I'm never gonna need to retrieve this again after this execution. So if I really wanted to go overboard in cleaning data from the database, I could always delete it at the end of, and this is what a coder would do. You know, here, if I don't need this, I could, well, a coder would probably store it in memory, but I could delete the data from the database at the end of the execution. I could also do that. All right, so here I'm going to say save donor ID. Okay. And also I'm going to explain why I'm saving this here. I mean, because I already have it. It's just because I want to do just one retrieve below. So here you would say, well, let's add the donor. But I also know that the email that comes through the first and last name that comes through from this action is combined into one. First, last name as one field. So I want to split that out. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to extract the person's name components. Okay, so I have a extract person name components here. And the value is the name from the registrant. So, oh no, sorry. So that was for the other get meeting participants. Sorry. So this already has a first and last name split out from get approved participants. So I don't need to do that. Okay, good. Fine. Fine then. So here I'm going to add the donor because I did not find it, right? So the left branch to false. I'm going to go to DonorPerfect. And here we're going to say add donor. Okay. So our implementation of DonorPerfect allows you to allow duplicate emails or not. If checked, the new donor will be created even if the email exists for a different donor account. If not checked, a new donor will not be created if the email already exists. It's really up to you how to use this. Everybody's different, you know. If you have a donor base in DonorPerfect where the husband and the wife have separate donor accounts, but they all share emails, which is pretty frequent, then I wouldn't check that. And if you want to make sure that each donor has a unique email, then I would check it. So I'm going to fetch the data here. And I'm going to take the email from the registrant. So here's the email right here. And let's just put first name. And then let's see, what else do we want here? Add donor. I'm going to reopen it. All right, so first name, last name. So anything you get here, so you get first name, last name. And I think that's pretty much all you're going to get that you're going to be able to use from the registrant at this particular point. Get approved registrant. Right. So no, you could put job title and anything, a phone, if you've captured that in your registration, whatever you've captured. Okay. So here I'm just going to put these two. And now I'm going to copy that, the save donor ID. I'm going to copy and paste that right below. But instead of pointing to this donor ID, I'm pointing it to this donor ID because I've just added it. Okay. So I just have to replace the donor ID here. There you go. So you notice I have two. So I have one that points to this because we found it, and I have one that points to this because we didn't find it and we just added it. So now I just need to retrieve it once, right? So here I'll just say get donor ID. So get value. And instead of retyping everything, I'm just going to copy the field mappings paste field mappings, rename this, get donor ID. Okay. All right. So now what? Now we've added or found the donor that we want to do something with based on the registrant that we got from Zoom. So now what? Well, now I want to check if they've even answered the questions, right? So here, what I can do is I can do a conditional, and I want to make sure that they've answered the question. So I'm going to come here and let me see, get meeting. All right, so get registrant. And for each person, so what did we ask here? We asked number of employees, role and purchase process. Question, okay, role and purchase process. Okay, whatever. Is not empty. So if they've answered a question, I'm going to have some answers to look at. So rename Q or yeah, Q&A not empty. And if they, I think I just lost my mouse power. but I do have Mr. Old School mouse as a backup. Hold on. I just ran out of battery on my mouse here. Always prepared, man. Always prepared. Do you still
That happens in real life.
do you still use those? These are awesome. I remember with a little wheel on it. Oh, you don't have a Mac, that's right. With a little wheel, it's pretty awesome.
I have a wheel.
Okay, so not empty. Good. All right, so it's hard to control the speed now of the scrolling. Okay, so if the donor then, okay, if the donor has not answered any questions, then we don't need to look for those questions. And if they have, we can just add, I'm sorry, if they have not answered, we can just add another record with the time of them attending. And if they have, we'll want to do other things. So here, what I'm going to do is just assume they haven't answered in this particular case. So here I'm going to say add app, DonorPerfect. And it's going to be add other info, okay? And it's going to need a donor ID, okay? Now the donor ID, Mark, I always give you one quiz during those demos. Where am I getting this donor ID?
It's going to be from the action right above your current condition that you are at. So right there, yes.
Perfect, you got it.
That's where you stored it.
Right.
Depending on which path they came down.
Exactly. Good.
Ta-da.
Very nice. And then in the comments, you can put anything you want, right? So here I'm going to say attended. And then here I'm going to have the meeting topic, right? So this is from get meeting topic. So attended this. I'm going to want to put the meeting ID, just, I don't know, you don't have to, but I'm going to do that. So the meeting ID is the object ID from the trigger, Okay. And then I'm going to want to put the meeting date. And you remember how I had a pretty date and I had a hardcore date, so, or
Yeah,
a date value date,
yeah, yeah.
hardcore date, as if there was a hardcore date. Here's a meeting date. The pretty date was the one that I converted up here, right here. So this is pretty because it has month, day, comma, and then year. Okay, so this is not a date format. It's just kind of like a text format. So I'm going to put this in the comments.
Right.
Let me see. I mean, you could do a lot more. You could put a lot more stuff, but I'm just going to end here. Let me see. Was there get meeting? Right. Get participants. See, you have all this information here. But if we had gotten get participants, you could even have the time, and I'll show you another example. You could even keep track of each person, how long they stayed, and when did they leave,
Right.
when did they join, all types of stuff. Okay. All right, and then there's an entry date. So this is where you recognize here month, day, year, right? That's the date that we converted here for the pretty time, not the pretty time, the date format. Remember this right here?
Yeah.
That's the one. So here we want to use the output of that date for that date format field that DonorPerfect is expecting. Okay. Okay. And that's that. All right. Now, what I'm going to do now, just because I want to show just kind of a different version of it, I'm going to open one that's already finished, and I'm going to, because I want to show some data that goes through. And because we're in a Zoom meeting, we don't have the luxury of starting a Zoom meeting and having 5 people answer different questions differently and being able. So
Right.
I just want to show one that's already built. So let me do that here. Okay. And you'll see it's very similar to what we've built here. I'll just save that here. Demo not finished. Okay, so take a look at this. So slightly different to what we've done, but really the same concept, right? So you have meeting ended here. Need to process meeting, so same thing. Okay, here I'm keeping track of a little bit more because I'm also keeping track of the time, right? So here you can see that I'm keeping track of a time in epoch seconds. Why? Well, this is the start time epoch second. So I took the start time and then I took the end time, and epoch seconds, and I think I've explained this before, but epoch seconds is basically a unique serial number for that second in history of mankind, right? And it starts in the 1970, and every second is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then going before 1970 is -1, -2, -3. And the reason it's very valuable in this sort of situation is you can really calculate durations or differences between times. Okay, so this is why we convert this to epoch seconds, because here we're going to calculate the effective duration of the meeting. Okay, and the way we calculate it here, we have start time, end time, and with some little bit of JavaScript, we're able to calculate the total time of the meeting. Okay, so what else did we do here? Here we used a get meeting participant report with poll results. Okay, we did the same thing here where we made sure that it wasn't the host, and if it's not a host, then we do some calculation for the times that are specific to that participant. And how do I know that? Is because we're looping now. I'm looping against the participants. You can see here, if I open this, it says get meeting participants. So now I'm looping, And for each participant, I reformat the date and time. So participant join time. In this case, I'm reformatting it to time, hour, minute with PM or AM. Okay. And here I am also reformatting the leave time. Okay. And here reformat the duration. And for the duration, again, some JavaScript to reformat, I think to take out some extra zeros and so forth from the duration. All right, but what I really wanted to show here is what do we do if we did not find a donor? Okay, so take a look at this. If we didn't find, and if we found the donor and the donor has answered questions, right? What we do here is we parse the answer and the question. So what does that mean? Well, what this means is the way we've implemented getting answers to questions through the API is to combine the question and the answers together. Okay. So, and I'll show you a sample data, but here we're able to parse it with the APIANT symbol with some tildes in between. So this is the question, this is the answer. And then we're able, for each participant, we're able to save their answers, right? So lookup value, key value pair here. So here I'm converting yes in Zoom is going to be just a Y in DonorPerfect, because DonorPerfect yes and no is just Y or N. Okay. And then finally here, we're able to add the other record with by donor ID based on all these answers. So take a look at this here. So here I have the meeting ID, the meeting date, the meeting start time, meeting end time, the meeting schedule duration, the meeting effective duration. So it was scheduled for an hour, but they only made it 45 minutes. Then I have the participant join time. Okay, so this is pretty cool stuff. So now you know how long that participant, stayed, and then the or when they joined, and then when they left, and how long they've stayed. So if you have a participant that stayed 5 minutes, you may want to communicate with them differently than if they stayed for the majority of the meeting or the webinar. Okay. And then here you have answers to some questions. So here are custom questions, which is, do you want to be a facilitator or do you want to be a volunteer? And in this case, you just put a yes, a Y or a no for yes or no based on what they've answered. And here you can see what they've answered because we do a lookup table. And then based on their answer, we convert yes to Y and N to no. Okay. So what does this look like? So let me show you here some examples. All right. So here's a meeting that ended. Okay, so you can look at the data. This is just a basic payload of a meeting ended. You can tell it doesn't have much information, just that the fact that the meeting ended and some time and date, but it doesn't tell you any details about participants or polls or anything like that. Okay, you got to go fetch that. Here it comes here and it says, okay, is this meeting status updated or updating? Okay. All right, here we get the meeting info. Here's all the information for the meeting. Okay. And here is where we get, well, this mouse is a little difficult to use. Here's where we get the approved meeting registrants. So here are the registrants: test, Joe, Sydney. These are 4 tests. Okay. The custom questions and answers that they've answered. And then the poll answers. All right, so for each person, you can see that these are their answers. And so when we come down here, Let me just do another example here, I think. Right here. Right here. That's a better example right here. So these are their poll results. Okay. And you can see that in the poll results, Mark, remember how we were splitting the question? Would you like to become a facilitator and would you like to learn about the volunteer?
Right.
This poll has 2 questions. If the poll had 5 questions, you would have those 5 questions just in one field for that array. Okay.
Right.
And so what we do is we, in this case, split those, as you can see here, we parse the element from the questions. So now this one right here is going to have 2 questions and then 2 answers. Yes, 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 no, yes, no, no, yes, yes. We just parse it. And that, so it's basically a loop within a loop. So you can see here, the first loop is all of the participants.
Right.
The second loop is for each participant. You check all of the answers to their questions.
Right.
Okay. But what's important, and that's really important to clarify here, the second loop is looping against the parsed elements. The second loop is not looping against the first array. Otherwise, you would mix and match the answers with because you're in different positions of the
Yes.
array.
It's
Okay?
only taking the current registrants questions and looping those and cleaning it up.
Exactly.
And then once it does that, it's going to move on to the next registrant, hence the other loop, until it
Exactly.
completes all of those.
Well said. Well said. And then again, at the very end here, remember this. What do we do here? We say that the meeting is updated. So if somebody starts and ends the meeting again, it's not going to reprocess it again. So what does this look like? Well, this is what it looks like in here. So we create a other record here. You can see that all the information for that particular participant, the meeting they attended, you can see that this person stayed, so participant duration 3 seconds. They weren't very interested apparently, but it's obviously it's because of testing. But now you can have a ton of information for each participant right here. And you can see that in this case, they answered that they wanted to be a facilitator and they wanted to be, and they were interested in volunteering, okay? And anytime this person attends one of those meetings, it will be added to the other here. Okay. So that's that, and that's it. Just to kind of give you a pretty good example of how you can do webinars and meetings. You can ask questions as registrants, or you can ask questions on the poll, and you can process this information automatically into different CRMs. In our case, we did it to DonorPerfect. To the other, or you could have done it to HubSpot or Salesforce, or like I said, MailChimp, Klaviyo, Entreport, Keep. We support all of these, but it's pretty cool stuff because webinars are a really good way to find out who's really interested in your product. You can see who actually attends the majority of it, and then also ask specific questions that can really qualify them as potential participant in your company for donations and for volunteerism, or as a potential customer for what they are interested in. Zoom is really, really powerful and pretty cool tool to integrate with those CRMs. And that's all I have for today. What do you have any questions, Mark? You can think of, or Robert, or should we end it and go digest our overeaten vegan turkey?
Yeah, the turkey made me snooze.
No, I think Fred is usually do a pretty thorough job of explaining how everything works and the reasons why. And I think these sessions definitely open up our minds to seeing like, hey, there is, you have to have a plan, but our system will allow you to kind of take that plan directly from your brain and onto the screen and move forward, with it at the same time. But if you're not sure and you run into an issue, at least now you have options to go, oh, well, this error is because the date doesn't look right. I need to reformat that. So, and a lot of the information is right there. It's just making sure that you understand how to interpret what options we have available, through like system tools and things like that. And that, I think that part would really help show people like there's so much more to this that you can actually do. And once it's in place, you can tweak it, you can run it, it'll run forever, it just depends.
Thank you. Yeah, no, you're right. And again, there's a lot about this platform that I marvel over, just as a user myself, because I build stuff. But I'll tell you that probably I don't want to say single, because you can never say that, most valuable thing, but one of the definitely top features for me is the visual history. It really helps you figure out where your thoughts were good thoughts, or where you just kind of forgot or omitted some facts and some potentials and use cases and so forth. But the visual history, that diagram where you move your mouse and you see the data, it shows you where the data goes. It's trial and error, and it's beautiful as long as you don't screw up your data. So try to work with data. It's safe. That if you're working with DonorPerfect and you're going to add an extra donor as a test, fine. But don't build something, run it against all your donors and hope that it was good. You want to test, right? It's step by step. But that visual history thing is magical to me, Robert?
Well, yeah, I mean, the process of building automations is trial and error because you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
And if it was just as easy as mapping field A to field A on the other system, that's one thing, but that's almost, it's rarely the case. Usually the data needs some sort of transformations, like especially with date formats. And you don't know about that until you run it and see the errors, and then you make adjustments and keep trying. So it's a development process to get the integration figured out because, again, you don't know it ahead of time. So, but the visual history and looking at test runs of the data helps you figure out the changes you need to make.
Right. And also it helps you, it's like anything that's complex, what you want to be able to do. Robert may be the exception to this, but from all the people that I know, but what I like to do is I like to put to rest what I've figured out. So I don't have to think about it anymore. It's all building blocks in my brain. I'm just not that smart. So I just need to be able to say, okay, I got to here, now what's next? And you want to be able to put to rest before. And that's the beauty about, I think, what we have here is you have documentation of what you've built. So if you forgot what you did, in step 1, 2, 3, and you're already at step 25, all you have to do is look at it and look at a couple history and think, oh, that's right. Here, I'm parsing this here. I'm doing a conditional there. I'm doing a lookup here. You don't have to figure it all out in your brain, right? And then do it. You just do it. It's very much like, my analogy is like Lego set. It's very much like a Lego. You build the floor and then you build a little kitchen. Those things used to be so cute when I watched my daughter play with it. But then you want to do a wall, and of course I want to do a fort, but you just take it step at a time, and you can build some pretty fantastic integrations when you do that. What do you think we should cover next, Robert?
I was thinking, how about some of the human interaction stuff? Maybe pauses or snoozes, maybe the moderation queue.
Love it. So that's a great idea. So what I'd like to do, because we use this with Intercom, because we use Intercom to handle leads. So we use this with Intercom, and we use this with Toki, which is an SMS app. And I think people would be really interested in seeing, how do you handle leads with your sales force, right? So with your people who are in the front line of sales. And when someone express interest, what if you could give your salesperson the choice? Hey, are you available for a call? Yes or no? Yes. It sends a text and say, hey, can I call you right now? No. It sends a text that says, hey, can you click here to schedule a call? And I think it's a perfect example of what your this new feature that we have, or new this feature we have, where humans can actually take can be part of those diagrams, and we're waiting for an answer. So we'll show that next time, and then we'll show it with Intercom, which is, you know, a pretty widely used chatting and marketing and customer support solution. Sounds good, Robert. You guys have a great weekend. That was fun.
All right.
And we'll see everybody in a week from now. Okay.
All right. Thanks, Brad.
Bye, guys.